We're delighted today to have as our guest Judge Griffin Bell, former advisor to governors, former chief of staff to Governor Vandiver, former Attorney General of the United States, former district federal judge. It's a great pleasure to have you, Judge Bell.
Thank you very much.
What I would like to do, if you will, Judge Bell, so our audience will know you a little better, is just tell us a little bit about yourself and growing up down in Sumter County.
Well, I grew up in Sumter County, which is in South Georgia, near Americus. I was born in what we could call a Concord community, which is about 9 miles from Americus. And my father was a cotton farmer, and my grandfather was a cotton farmer. My grandfather's house is still standing there at Concord. I rode by there recently. They both had to sell their farms during the time of the gold wave. They wiped out all the cotton farmers. They moved into Americus. I was attending school in a country school, and I had skipped a grade. And so when I moved into Americus, I started into the 4th grade. But I'd skipped the 3rd grade, so I was in the 4th grade, which was something of a disadvantage. I finally finished high school when I was 15. But I feel like I grew up in Americus, although I was born on a farm. And I enjoyed the life of a small town, knew everybody in the town, basically. My father's first cousin was a noted lawyer and judge. He was on the Supreme Court of Georgia. And my father always wanted me to be a lawyer, so he started talking to me when I was a little boy about being a lawyer. And he introduced me to lawyers, and he used to take me by the courthouse during court week, let me listen to the arguments. And I think it was in my head to be a lawyer, and that's what I ended up being. But I've had a very good life. I went to Georgia Southwestern. We didn't have very much money, and that was all I could afford. It was a good junior college. And then I had to go into, I had a low draft number. I was getting ready to go to law school at Mercer, and on a church scholarship. And I got a low draft number, so I decided I'd serve 1 year in the military and then go to law school. And of course the war started right after that, and 4.5 years later before I got out of the Army. But I then did go to Mercer Law School. I was on the way to Athens to go to the University of Georgia, and this is an old story. And I decided I'd stop at Macon and ask the dean if he could get me a job part-time in a law firm, so I might speed up my career. And the dean said, if you'll make good grades the first quarter, I'll guarantee you a job. And so I never got to Athens. I just decided I'd stay in Macon and get that job. And I was able to pass the bar examination at the 4th quarter. I was in law school, I think. And one of the jokes we tell is that I became the city attorney of Warner Robins while I was still in law school. But the reason I did, I lived in Warner Robins, commuted into Macon, and it was nice. But I then was working part-time in this law firm in Macon, and I got a job with a law firm in Savannah, and was there for 4 years. And then our principal client was Central Georgia Railroad, and I got to know all about Georgia. Everywhere that Central Georgia had a station, basically I went to with some kind of a litigation. And then I went up to Rome, Georgia to represent the chairman of the board of the railroad when his own lawyer died suddenly. And then I was recruited by King and Spalding to come down here as a partner. And I think I'd been practicing law 6 years then. Joined King and Spalding, and I was in King and Spalding for about 9 years, and during that time I became the managing partner, we call it, of the law firm. succeeded Mr. Hugh Spaulding, and during that time I managed I was a co-chairman of the Kennedy campaign for president. And that's how I finally got into the federal judging business. I was a co-chairman along with George L. Smith, who was Speaker of the House. And then President Kennedy nominated me to be on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers 6 states, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. And I kept that job for about 14 years. Senator Russell Talmadge was the senator, and they endorsed me, sponsored me, and I was able to get confirmed. And I left and came back to the law firm and was here about 11 months and became Attorney General. The way I became Attorney General, President Carter, I had known all my life because I'm 9 miles from Plains, and our families were friends. He asked me to find someone to be Attorney General, and I spent a considerable time interviewing people to get somebody to be an Attorney General, and I never could find anybody that suited him. So people jokingly now claim that I did such a poor job that I got the job myself. However, it may be, I did end up with the job, and that's how I became Attorney General. I had a great experience on the bench. It was during the Civil Rights Revolution, and it sort of became a focus of my career in a way. The whole Civil Rights era, I was Governor Vandiver's chief of staff, and he had promised there would be no integration of the schools. And after he was elected, but before he took office, the Supreme Court handed down what we call the second Little Rock decision. And in that decision, they held that even the threat of violence was no excuse for not integrating the schools. So it became clear to me and to most everyone else that Governor Vandiver couldn't carry out his pledge, that there would be no integration. So the governor made me chief of staff, which is an honorary position, but I tell people it was like being a free lawyer. So he made me chairman of a committee of 5 people to advise him on what we should do about the Brown West Board of Education decision and carrying it out. And we went around and talked to governors and attorney generals in other states in the South, and even in Virginia, where they had something that was become quite famous called massive resistance. And I had to report to the governor that no one had a plan to keep from following the law. Law is a law, and you have to follow it. And that became a big issue in Georgia politics. And I was accused of being a great liberal by people that didn't want to have any integration at all, wanted to hold the line. But finally, I told the governor that I thought we ought to let the people speak. And I wrote up a resolution at home on a Sunday night, and took it to the governor the next day, and he didn't know if I was doing this, and let him read it. And it was to have these hearings in the 10 congressional districts and let the people decide if they wanted to keep the public schools open, or did we want to go out of the school business, not put any state money in schools. You couldn't stop the local support of schools, but this was state support. And he thought well of it, but he said this won't work unless we have a very strong chairman. And he wanted me to find the chairman. I had it written in a way where every person on it would either be appointed by the governor, the Speaker of the House, or the President of the Senate, except some people that had public offices, like head of the Farm Bureau and different organizations. And he said, I said, who would you like to be the chairman? He said, I would like to have Mr. Hugh Spaulding or John Sibley. John Sibley was, at that time, had left King and Spaulding and had gone, was head of the Sun Trust, Trust Company Bank. But his office was adjacent to the law firm office. So I went to see Mr. Spaulding, and he said he didn't want to do it because he was a member of the Catholic Church, and people might think there was something wrong with him, a Catholic, doing this job. And he said it'd be better for John Sibley to do it. And I said, well, I haven't been to see him yet. He said, well, let me talk to him before you go. So then I talked to Mr. Sibley, and Mr. Sibley said, is this bona fide, or is it some kind of a dodge somebody's thought of? I said, as far as I know, it's bona fide. I'm the one that thought of it. So he said, well, I might do it, but the governor's got to ask me. He's got to come, and I want to talk to him. I want to be sure I know what we're doing. So I got the governor to go to see him, and he agreed to be the chairperson, and that turned out to be a very good thing because he was a good chair. He's a good chairman. And they started these hearings. They had 10 of them, and one in each congressional district. And Mr. Sibley said he wanted to have the first one in the place where there'd be the most resistance to integrating the schools. And they picked Americus, my hometown. And they had one hearing in Gainesville. I've forgotten where all the hearings were, but they were well attended. And people voiced their opinions. And then there were 21 people on the commission, and they voted to keep the schools open, even though they had to comply with the law. And there was a good many dissents to the majority holding, but that's the way it turned out. And then based on that, we decided that we had to repeal all the laws that had been passed just a few years earlier when they changed the flag and all sorts of things. Those laws we couldn't be complied with, so we had to have a session of the legislature, a special session, to repeal those laws. So Governor Vandiver called a special session, and he addressed the General Assembly on television at night, which was the first time that had ever been done, to explain the crisis and what we had to do. And we changed all those laws in just a few days, and left it up to each community to do what they wanted to do about the schools. And so Atlanta was the first one to have any integration. Finally, the whole state complied, and I think looking back on it, it was a very wise thing to do. We had to comply with the law, and there's no way around it. And we did it about as well as we could have done it. And I think we got way ahead of some of our neighboring brothers and sisters because we did comply with the law. I think it turned out to be a good thing. I think it cost Ernie his political career. He knew that, but that was beside the point. And then when we had the University of Georgia crisis, it really brought it to a head because at that time he had the power to cut off all funding to the university. And that came up again, the very same thing, whether we're going to follow the law or not. And Ernie called this famous meeting, which you probably already know about, at the mansion. I was there and witnessed it, where he had all his top people, 21 of them, to tell them goodbye, assuming they all would resign in protest because he was going to announce he was not going to close the university. And that he couldn't bring himself to do it. And they started down the line and told Mr. Gillis was the first one. He told Mr. Jim Gillis goodbye, thanked him for all he'd done for him. And he was going down the line, and finally hit Frank Twitty, who was the majority leader in the House, and Twitty said, well, Governor, don't tell me goodbye. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay with you. And then the next one was Carl Sanders. He was a senator. He said the same thing. And the upshot was that not one of them left. They all decided to stay. And that was before we repealed all the laws. And that whole thing just worked out. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing to watch it. Also very exciting and exhilarating to see people follow the law. That's one of the problems with the world, you know, there's so many places where the law is not followed. That's a redeeming feature, I think, probably of our country, that we are accustomed to following the law, even though it's hard, and even though we didn't agree with the Supreme Court decision. And it was something that Congress should have done rather than having the Supreme Court issue an edict. That's where most of the trouble started. And instead of the fifth section of the 14th Amendment provided it would be enforced by the Congress, and there never was. The Supreme Court did it, but still the law. And the supremacy clause in the Constitution makes that clear. Every officer, state or federal, has to take the same oath. And that means that the Supreme Court decisions, as well as the federal statutes, are the supreme law of the country. Now, this brings me into the school desegregation cases. While I was a judge, I had this happen a lot of times. I had more school cases than any judges ever had. And most of them I was able to work out a compromise with the lawyers. I'd bring the lawyers in, talk with them, and sometimes the school superintendents, and they'd work out their own plans. And only in one or two instances did we have to do something different. I had to put the school board in Tolliver County in receivership, appoint state school superintendent to run it, because the school superintendent was going to defy the court. And it was sort of a test case that her lawyers wanted us to put her in jail, this woman, and I had no idea doing anything like that. And so I just said, well, we've turned the school system over to a receiver. So I had to threaten that a time or two, but after we did it once, nobody else wanted to be put in that shape. And it worked out pretty well. We knew that in some of the districts where they had small student bodies, just two buildings or four buildings, that the schools would turn black. I had a chart I made over in Mississippi. We had 32 school districts over there I was responsible for. And I made a chart just to see what the tipping point was before the whites would leave and start a private school. It was around 30%, a little above 30 whites would start to leave. So you knew in advance you were getting ready to destroy some public schools. But that was a cost of complying with the law. Everybody was losing something, and everybody was gaining something. So it was that's the way it happened to be. And I felt like an administrator. I was not a judge so much as I was an administrator. But it was my duty to do that, so I did the best I could. And we had a lot of different kinds of civil rights cases.
3,000 cases you heard.
Yeah.
Wrote 1,000 opinions.
Yeah, that's right.
And most of those were civil rights, weren't they?
Well, a lot of them were. A lot of them were criminal cases, habeas corpus, just a mix with lots of civil rights cases, involving a lot of things besides schools. I remember having a case in Mississippi where they had an appeal and some little town, and I said, well, let me get this straight now. What was the issue? These three judges sitting together, but each one of us could ask questions. I said, what started all of this? They'd been parading, and they had an injunction against parading and whatnot. And see, the South had to get used to the First Amendment, that you have a right to assemble and petition the government for your grievances, which means you'd march. And you got entitled to police protection when you march. Well, that was a shocking thing to most people to know that was the law. And I asked these lawyers, I said, what started all this ruckus over there in this town in Mississippi? And they said, well, it was the blacks caused it. They were marching. And I said, well, why were they marching? And he didn't give me a direct answer. And I asked the lawyer for the blacks what the march was about. I thought it was a school case or something like that. He said, we were marching to get some street lights and paving. That our part of town didn't have any street lights or paving, and where the whites lived had all the street lights and paved roads, and that's all it was about. I said, I'll tell you what, we're not going to hear anymore in this case. Go home and get that settled among yourselves and just act fairly. And you won't ever hear. I never heard any more about that case. It went away. But little things like that would happen. That's why I felt like more of an administrator than a judge many times in those cases. But I learned a lot during that time, and after I was in the government, after I left the Attorney General's office, during the Reagan administration, I was appointed to the Commission on South Africa by Secretary Schultz, the State Department, and I was sent to South Africa to study the court system to see if they could eliminate apartheid through the court system. And I had to report back that they couldn't because they didn't have a constitution. There was nothing there's no governing law. The parliament in South Africa could overrule any judge. And the parliament had given all their powers to 10 people and the president. So they could just, and they would be in order stopping hearings in court, that sort of thing. So there's no way that would have worked out. That was sad to have it be like that. But of course, by that time, all the whites wished they had a constitution. And they would have been better off, but they didn't have one. But I knew so much about the integration crisis because of my experience in this country. That's why they asked me to go over and do that. But at any rate, I finally decided that I was 56 years old, and I didn't want to do the judging the rest of my life. The Civil Rights Revolution had essentially ended, and we were overrun with criminal cases like we are today, where every criminal is a free lawyer, and the lawyer, now the state's even paying lawyers, and they've raised all these points of every drug dealer claims his rights are being violated in some way, and I didn't want to hear any more of those cases, so I decided I'd rather go back and be a lawyer, and that's what I did, and that's how I came back to this law firm, and I've been in this law firm 3 different times. So it's like having a home to go back to in a way, but I came back, and then that's when President Carter asked me to find an Attorney General, and that's how I got started in the Attorney General's job, which I like very much. Really, people ask me, what's the best job you ever had? And I say, being Attorney General, because you could get something done. You didn't have to ask anybody. On the court, I had to get other judges to agree. But there, you just tell people to do things and you get them done. We did a lot of great things.
You know, there's one thing I noticed while you were Attorney General, that's been 3 decades ago. You concentrated on white-collar crime.
Yeah.
Did you anticipate that type of activity that we've had the last few years?
I did.
You did?
I did. I thought that was going to happen. There's so much opportunity for greed in the enterprise system, and greed will destroy anything, and it'll destroy business if you're not careful. And we're seeing more of that now than we ever have before. And I just thought there's too much government money flowing for it not to have some kind of a problem. Here they've taken over health care. 20% of the national economy is spent on medicine now. There's no hospital. Hardly anything can operate without some government money coming in. Same way with farming. anything you can think of, the government's funneling money in. So long as that goes in there, somebody's going to take part of it. And you know that's going to happen. And if it wasn't for the fact that you could be prosecuted, no telling how bad it'd be. So I foresaw that. And I knew that was going to happen. And the other thing that I probably spent a lot of time on was making certain that the litigating capacity of the government is in one place, in the Justice Department, not every little agency having lawyers and way to litigate. That's causing a lot of problems in Georgia now. Back at that time, all of the law enforcement was under the Attorney General. Now every little state agency's got their own lawyers. And I don't know what the Attorney General even has control of most of them. That's a very bad thing. Even the colleges now have lawyers. And I don't think that's a good thing. I think all the law enforcement ought to be one place and you ought to know who's in charge so that you can hold that person responsible. And we used to have that in Georgia. But in the federal government, it's a fight every day to keep agencies from doing that. They'll create more lawsuits, but the federal system, the Attorney General is the last one that has anything to do with litigation. They can't appeal a case without the Attorney General to read into it, things like that. And that was very important to get the agencies to understand that and enforce it. And Mike Egan, you remember Mike Egan, he was a Republican legislator. He was one of my assistants up there, one of the top people. And that was his job to keep up with that, the litigating capacity of the Justice Department, settle disputes with agencies and whatnot.
You also looked at corruption in Congress.
Oh yeah, we had, that's right. Well, that was sort of forced on me. That when I got there, it was they went a bad situation. There was a Korean named Thompson Park. Is supposed to have bribed a lot of congressmen. And there was an article in the New York Times that he had bribed over 200 members of the House. And Speaker O'Neill asked me to come over and address the House in a off-the-record session about what the truth was. And I did, and I looked at, got all the people to do something about it, studied it out. And I told him that was a gross exaggeration, that there was some bribes, but we didn't, I thought there was less than 10. It turned out to be 5. Now, the New York Times said there's 200, over 200. Well, that would show we had the whole government was corrupt, but it wasn't like that. And we got to the bottom of all that. And I finally, Thompson Park left the country and went to South Korea, and he wanted to come back, and I agreed that we might let him come back if he'd take a lie to take the test over there to be administered by the FBI. And I sent some FBI agents and a deputy attorney general over there to take his deposition to find out what the truth was about how many congressmen he had bribed. And the deputy attorney general called me on the scrambler phone from Seoul, Korea, and said that we can't get the truth out of him, he's lying. And I said, well, just tell him he's lying and tell him he can't come back. And the whole deal's off. They went back there and told him that, and then he decided to tell the truth. Anyway, that's where we got most of the information. We had him, I'd already had him indicted, and if he'd had left there, we were going to pick him up in London or Paris, flying back and arrest him anyway. But he wouldn't come back. But we got it all straightened out. But that was a bad thing, and there were a few, you know, if you got 400, 500 people in Congress, 535, found to be a few bad eggs. There's a few bad ones in this building. Everywhere there's a few. Question is, I mean, the secret is to hold it down to a few. That's what the law is for.
after your service as Attorney General, you also participated in a lot of investigations
Yeah,
for corruptions in corporations.
I did, yeah. I actually made a practice out of it. We have something in the law firm called special matters. That's corporate investigations, representing people in white collar crime situations with the government. And we represent a lot of people that get in trouble with the government about contracts and whatnot. And our policy is that if we think they're guilty, we tell them so. If we settle with the government, pay the government back, it's tax money. And it works out pretty well. It's become a big business. But I did a lot of corporate investigations. I did the Exxon Valdez grounding investigation, for example. A lot of times you need to just know what happened. And it's so much speculation. So it's in the interest of companies to sometimes just bring an outsider to find out for sure what happened. So I've done a lot of that. I've had a very, very interesting career, and I've been retired now 3 years. And at first it's sort of difficult to get out of the mainstream, but I've gotten used to not being in it. And I'm sort of enjoying life, but I still keep office as secretary. So I know what's going on, but I don't do much myself.
But your secretary just reminded us that you have a doctor's appointment.
I do, yeah.
But let me end this, Judge Bell.
I got 15 more minutes.
Oh, you do? Yeah. Well, good. Well, let's go right on. Let's go on.
Yeah. No, well, you asked me some questions now. I'm giving you sort of a general rundown.
Well, I would like to ask you a question about your relationship with President Carter while you were in Washington.
Well, it was very good. President Carter and I don't see eye to eye on politics much now, but then he was a very good president to work for. He had the right idea about the Justice Department. He told me in advance that he didn't think there ought to be any politics at all in the Justice Department. That he considered it to be a place that ought to be neutral. We started calling it a neutral zone in the government. If you think about it, the law has to operate on neutral principles. And if it doesn't, then there's some outside forces that are having an effect, which would not be proper. And so, with that in mind, I never had to go to a political meeting of any kind. I was never asked to do anything that had anything to do with politics. And 2 or 3 times, somebody at the White House would try to influence somebody, and I'd put a stop to it immediately. One time, I actually got somebody fired before the Justice Department who tried to succeed in a criminal case. And at that time, President Carter asked me to come over and speak to the White House staff about not ever trying to interfere with the Justice Department. And then he asked me to make one to tell them they couldn't interfere with the Defense Department. The same way. So he has the right idea about the government. He's very sound on how the government ought to operate. Very ethical. And it was a pleasure to work with him.
When he was governor of Georgia, he was sort of a hands-on manager.
Yeah.
It sounds like that he left you to run the Justice
He did.
Department.
And I always thought it was because he wasn't a lawyer. You know, even they said Lester Maddox didn't try to run the judiciary. He'd get people to do it. But President Carter let me run it, and it was good. And I think that's the way the Justice Department has to be run. I was talking to some people this morning about the Justice Department, and we were making the point of the people that I was talking to had both at one time been in the Justice Department. It runs well when there's not a politician running it. Get a lawyer. Just get a good lawyer and put him in there. Somebody that understands the federal system. You can't just take somebody like, we'll say, Ms. Reno, who was a state prosecutor in Miami. They don't have a broad enough knowledge to do the job well to begin with. I don't mean to criticize her, but she would be an example of somebody who wasn't trained. You know, I was trained in the federal judiciary, so that made it easy for me. But if if you just take some politician and put him in there, you asking for trouble. That we shouldn't have that. And the Justice Department ebbs and flows depending on who the Attorney General is, because it reflects the Attorney General. Although the people there are career workers, and they are, well, I like to compare them to the British civil servants. Doesn't matter who the people elect. You got this staff, it's really professional. And the Justice Department got worlds of people like that. All the lawyers have come in on the honor system, which means they have to be in top 10% of the classes. And they like it, and most of them will just stay there. You think they'd come stay 2 or 3 years, they had to sign up for 4 years to get in the program. But there's lots of them have been there 15, 20 years. And that makes it a good place. But you still have to have a leader, and the top people. The president gets about, at that time, got about 70 appointments at the Justice Department out of 55,000. So, and the rest of them are in place. But they are really the policy makers, the new people. I remember one time I had to replace the head of the antitrust division who didn't want to leave. He said that he wasn't interfering with President Carter's program. He said, I'm running my own program. I said, that's the reason you have to leave. You haven't been elected, you're running your own program. I said, we have elections in this country, you know.
You also paid special attention to intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
Attorney General.
Well, I knew a little bit about intelligence from some court cases, but not much. And I had to study all of that. I became sort of a semi-expert in the field. I mean, I understand the constitutional power of the president, and I'm the one that got the law passed setting up the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that we use now. And I didn't think of that. Attorney General Levy, who was Attorney General under Ford, thought of that. And he had been president of the University of Chicago. And he got to Washington right after Watergate. And the Senate and the House committees, Church Committee and some committee in the House had about destroyed the foreign intelligence capacity with the investigations. And he set out to rebuild it. And he finally, and the Attorney General in the system, the agent of the President, approves all these foreign intelligence operations like wiretapping and those sorts of things. And General Levy decided that we had to have the imprimatur of the federal courts in some way for the public to have confidence in the system. And he got a bill introduced in the Congress which was not passed to set up that Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. He recommended it to me. I got it passed. And I testified though in the House that that did not take away the president's power. If the president didn't want to follow that, he wouldn't have to follow it. Because the president's executive power gives the president the right to operate foreign intelligence like he operates foreign policy. And his authority for that was John Marshall, who, as you know, was a lieutenant under George Washington. And Washington set the government up. And John Marshall, when he was the Secretary of State under John Adams, testified in the House as to the duty and power of the executive. And one of them, he said, what power was to operate the foreign intelligence, which he said has to be done in secret. And so the Supreme Court of the United States in 1936, in an opinion, quoted that and upheld it, saying that is a law. It is a law now. And despite what all the congressmen argue about, and all the pundits have to say, that is the law. President Carter agreed to use the Foreign Intelligence Court. And then the president since then have agreed to it, but it got so cumbersome, given the fact of Al-Qaeda, where they're making these phone calls. You couldn't go into the Justice Department have an investigation and get an order from the Attorney General and then the court to listen on the phone. It would be over with. So President Bush then decided the thing to do after 9/11 was to go ahead and on his own order have them listen to these calls if it was coming from Al-Qaeda source into this country. That's what they were doing. And that case is in court now in the Sixth Circuit. And I anticipate they're going to reverse that district court judge in Detroit. If not, the Supreme Court's going to reverse them. The Supreme Court knows this law just as well as I know what it is. So, but the president, in the meanwhile, is now met with had somebody meet with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, who are just federal judges appointed on special duty. And one of the first of the 7, I worked with the Chief Justice to set up the court. One of the first was Bill O'Kelly. Yeah, he served as one of the judges. And what you do is have a judge on duty 30 days, and then another one 30 days, and they sign off on these things. And it's not like getting a warrant. They sign an approval of something the Attorney General already approved. And so they've had a meeting. Obviously, I don't know this, but I've got this bulletin from the Attorney General explaining it. That from now on, the Foreign Intelligence Court is set up some kind of expedited way where you do it fast enough. It just took too long, and they turned down, a FBI request to look at a computer, at the server on a computer that one of these Al-Qaeda types had. It actually went, I think, was one of the ones that got on the airplane, flew up the planes. They turned that down because they didn't have enough information at the Justice Department, and that was one of the big things when they had the 9/11 hearing. They were complaining about one of the members of the commission was Jamie Gorelick, who was deputy to Ms. Reno, and they blamed her for turning it down. That was one of the big things that was going on, but they never, it's all so secret you couldn't tell from the newspaper what it was about. But that was it, and it was about that time that the president decided that he had to sign these orders so we could listen to those calls. And the general public, I'm sure, does not object to listen to us overhearing a call from somebody in the Al-Qaeda organization. But they all wonder how they don't want the president to do that. They think, well, the president's got too much power. Well, that's his job under the Constitution. Unless we don't agree with George Washington and John Marshall and John Adams, we got another crowd we're listening to.
On the subject of justice, what rights do these foreigners who come into this country to commit those acts have under our Constitution?
Well, people can't understand why they have any rights. Illegal aliens even claim rights. But I guess because we're so civilized, we give them some of the rights. But they don't have every right that a citizen has. But they have some rights to due process, for example. They will not hold people without having a basis for holding them. Even the prisoners at Guantanamo. I'm on the review panel for those cases. If we ever had one to review, they haven't tried one yet. But they have you got to be saying you're not holding the wrong person. It could be a mistake. So they have in military hearings to be sure they got the right. But that's why they release some of them. And the others they were released, but the country won't take them back they came from. They don't want them. There's one Australian down there, and the Prime Minister of Australia said we'd be glad to take him back after y'all finish trying him. They figure they'll never get him back. But these are not the most desirable people.
Yes, that's true. Well, I want to share with our audience this
quote about our guest today, Judge Bell, who I have admired personally over the years for all the great service he's rendered to the state of Georgia. But this is from Chief Justice Warren Burger, who said, "No finer man has ever occupied the office of Attorney General of the United States or discharged his duty with greater distinction than Griffin Bell." I sit here in awe of you, sir.
All right, I thank you very much. That shows what a good friend Chief Justice Burger was.